Welcome to This Week in Habsland. My name is Jordan. I'm joined by Brian. We are here each Monday to discuss all things Montreal Canadiens. You can find us on the socials, well, primarily Blue Sky these days, and TikTok at Habsland Pod. On this week's episode of the podcast, we will be doing some fill in the blank in the second half of the episode surrounding the topic of the Habs playoff chances, and we'll be doing our usual headlines of the week. Brian, I think maybe we should jump right into these headlines. We'll start with our Habsland headline of the week, which is back down to earth. I think you saw this in certainly Martin St. Louis quotes following the overtime loss to New Jersey on Saturday, and Cole Caulfield as well, about this wasn't exactly their best week. They still battled through a bunch of games. They still had some comebacks in there, whether they stuck or not, whatever. But overall, this team has been riding a high for 3-4 weeks now at this point. And this most recent week with the comeback win against Tampa, the disappointing loss to Detroit, and then the overtime loss at home to Jake Allen and the New Jersey Devils. This felt like a week where it was almost like an exhale, but kind of like, well, there was only so long we could, continue to lift the car for. Eventually you're going to have to put it down and take a beat. Is that an accurate assessment of what we saw in these past 3 games?
Yeah, I think that's just it. Hockey's too random a sport to just go on a tear for a really extended period of time and always be getting the results. Though this time it wasn't just about the results. I mean, we could start with that. Like the New Jersey game, the 9th loss in a row at home to them, the loss to Detroit, mistakes galore, loss of focus, lack of discipline at bad times. Like, yeah, this is back down to earth. This is back to what we were seeing at the beginning of this season, all throughout this rebuild. It's the same problems creeping in, which that happens. That's totally understandable for a team that's developing, for guys who are still gaining chemistry together. So I think that this is totally standard. On the plus side, they won 10 out of the 15 games so far in the span of games that we've been calling the death stretch, which, depending if you take the Wild seriously still or not, that death stretch ends against Winnipeg or Minnesota this week. So unbelievable results in that span. Mm-hmm. It would have been like, I don't even know how to describe how cool that would have been if they had really forced their way to all 16 or 17, whatever games in this stretch they played really, really well, with a couple exceptions of the bad teams that they lost to. That would have been really nice, but maybe that was asking too much.
Yeah. First of all, I'm really going to enjoy there's going to be many aspects of post rebuild that I think we're going to enjoy. Obviously, the team being good, not having these stats of like, well, that's the 12th straight loss to this team in this arena. I mean,
yeah, right.
The Minnesota one's just going to stand forever because the fact that the Canadiens, they haven't won in Minnesota in 13 years. But like the New Jersey one is one that I'm looking forward to. Like there's a lot of, there's those consecutive losses to Ottawa for a while. Like in time, all of these frustrating stats are going to go away. I did not know about that Devils one.
They were so close to breaking it too. They were so close, stayed with them all night. The Devils just absolutely peppered Dobesh too. So
yeah. I think
he was a huge part of this 10 out of 15 wins stretch as well. Like absolutely. Dobesh, unbelievable run, buddy. 6 great games. I wish the Habs had done a little more for you.
So let's keep going on the New Jersey game. I think we should probably talk about the last play. Let's hold on to that for a second. What was interesting about, especially contrasting it with the Detroit game, the Habs were certainly asleep for the first 10 to 12 minutes. Detroit woke up and Detroit just blasted the Canadiens. But like there was something weird happening where even in those first 10 to 12 minutes, the Canadiens were like, all right. They were, it seemed like eye test. But then you would look at the shots and they were like 9-2 right out the gate. And that continued throughout the game. What was interesting is the New Jersey game was similar to where the shot differential for a while, you were looking at it like, holy moly, this is not what I actually think. It was like 28-13 at one point or something. But I was, watching it. I'm like, what? Canadiens are actually sticking through it. They have a really good stretch there up until the game tying goal. And then New Jersey kind of said like, okay, enough's enough. And those last 10 minutes of the third and the overtime was weird, but like you saw like, oh, that's a playoff team going from third gear into fourth gear. Like that is like, we're talking about like back down to earth and like the Canadiens kind of restabilizing as like, oh, they're an okay team. It was interesting to see on the other side of the ice, New Jersey kind of be like, okay, we're gonna go up our level now, and the Canadiens, let's see if the Habs can match it. And for this specific night, some nights they do. Like they've matched the Panthers, they've matched the Avalanche, they've matched the Golden Knights. They couldn't match it, and maybe that's part of the whole back down to earth of like, well, they don't have that gear right now because they're the young team, inconsistent team. But New Jersey had that gear on Saturday night, and they just blew their doors off the Canadiens towards the end of the game.
Yeah, those are really the games that make it clear that we're still a step or two away.
Yeah.
Not that we're out of the picture yet, though. Like, there's still a very, very good chance here. And you know what? I'm going to save this for later because we're going to get into a discussion of what it's going to take for the Canadiens to make the playoffs this year. So maybe I'll put that on hold for now. But you mentioned a few teams. The Stars was another one that they kept in with. They lost that one in a shootout originally, and then they went back in Dallas and beat them 3-1, and that game was unbelievable. And a similar weird thing with the shots happened against Utah a couple weeks back too. I remember, I think the shots were like something like 9 or 10-1 in the first 10 minutes for Utah, and then in the second period, it was the exact opposite. It was like 9 or 10-1 for Montreal in the first like 10-15 minutes of the second period. So that was an example of the Habs waking up and figuring it out, which they didn't do against Detroit. To take this discussion to another team, like against Detroit, they didn't really wake up in that way and dominate at any point in the game. The best they did was go kind of toe-to-toe with them for a while, but it wasn't enough. Detroit had already done the damage, and there was no going back from that.
I don't totally agree with the statement I'm about to make, but you could argue that Dobish's performance at 3-1 versus Montembeault's performance at 2-0 versus Detroit was the difference in both those games. Whereas Monty lets in the worst goal he's let in this season, which I'm fairly certain was the 3-0 goal against Detroit. And that was like that, you know, little comeback. They did all right to make it 4-2, but that third goal, it couldn't happen. You contrast that with what Dobish did on Saturday night at 3-1, kept the Habs in it just enough for the goals to come. I don't know if I fully agree with that statement because like the Canadiens they were a better team on Saturday night, but it's the intangible portion of like your goalie kept you in it long enough for you to wake up. Now, there are still concerns because like, let's talk about it again, like the Tampa game as well. They were not the better team in any of the 3 games they played this week. For stretches, yes, they were a better team. There was moments in Tampa where we were like, okay, they're taking it to the Lightning. Overall, I thought Tampa was the better team. Same thing with New Jersey. New Jersey, there was like a 20-minute stretch there, second half of the second period, first half of the third period, where I'm like, okay, no, the Canadiens are the better team right now. And then, but overall, like the first part of the game, Jersey was better, and Jersey killed the Habs down the stretch. And then Detroit was basically the better team throughout the entirety of the game, maybe some moments here or there. The inconsistency is certainly plaguing the team right now, but it's that part of like, if your goalie keeps you in it, and the Habs have had really good goaltending from both goalies over the past month, then you have opportunities to steal wins. And that's what they did against Tampa, and they stole a point against New Jersey.
Yeah, and then there they stole the win, and that's a really good assessment, I think, Jordan. He was unreal in the third. He made that really strong extended pad save, followed by the glove right after on the rebound, just ended the chance, and it looked like earlier in the game, you know, he's coming into this game, he's 5-0-0, 940 whatever save percentage, like just unbeatable up until this point. And then not the first goal, I think it was the second goal if I remember correct, maybe the third, but that one that just went through his legs and he looked up at the sky. And that's the first time I've seen him do that because he knew he should have had it. But then I look at the angle, like I look at the angle of the camera angle behind his head of the shot. I was like, oh, he couldn't see that puck. Like there were like 4 guys in front of him. He flat out couldn't see it. So at first I was like, oh, okay, Jakub Dobiš is fallible. And then he made that save, that, you know, that string of 2 saves in the third. And I was like, maybe he's not fallible. Maybe that was the defense fault getting in his way. I don't know if I'm just trying to find like excuses for him because I'm so pumped up by his play. But yeah, he's been unreal, and it was sad to see the Canadiens not get him the win against New Jersey in overtime there. Yeah. You alluded to it before, so maybe I'll let you take it from here. I want to hear what you think about that play in overtime.
2 minutes on the clock on this one, okay? I know you and I probably don't want to talk about it too much because we don't like hyper focusing on one play in the middle of the season because that is an awful way to analyze a sporting team. What I will say is this is the, like, who are you blaming more, Patrick Laine or Mike Matheson? No one's putting anything on Jakub Dobiš here.
No, of course.
So okay. So this is what happens, right? Like Patrick Laine's, that was a bad pass. Like point blank, it was a bad pass. However, it is a 3-on-3 where you always need to have one player high. It doesn't always need to be the defenseman, of course. You actually see Suzuki quite often being the high guy when it's him with Caulfield and Hudson, because Hudson's a maniac and he runs around everywhere. You'll notice that Suzuki's the guy at the blue line, red line, like the offensive half of the ice. And I don't know how much of it is, like Matheson was in the right spot if the pass was good. So by that logic, it's more Patrick Laine's fault. But I tend to lean more on like it's more Laine than Matheson, but I understand some of the Matheson criticism. How about you?
It's both of them, obviously. The pass was bad. I don't fault Matheson at all for his positioning. At all. Because you're in 3-on-3 and you're striving to score a goal. So he's pinched in a little bit. He's expecting a clean pass. If he gets it, he probably scores or makes a play, or that puck could have gone in the other net, is what I'm saying. Mm-hmm. But the thing that he did really wrong was after the miss pass and the opposition's coming the other way, potentially starting a 2-on-1, he doesn't go to the inside of the ice to cut when the player gets the puck. It was so clear, even with Matheson's speed, he wasn't getting to that puck first. And he wasn't going to out-battle the other player because he could just chip it ahead to his teammate. So what Matheson should have done is go up the middle and cut off the eventual path of that player rather than go to the outside to the board. Like, he went to the outside at the boards and basically took himself out of the play, which, like, I'm very happy you said we're not going to dwell on this. Like, it's already been 2 minutes, so maybe we cut it there. But, like, we're not going to dwell on that one single split-second decision that Matheson made. But I will say too, that wasn't the only mistake in that game Matheson made. There were rough night. It was a very rough night. There were several positioning errors. It was the first time since Matheson's been to the right where I thought that there were multiple glaring errors between he and Hudson in the same night. Which, is there something to that? I don't know. On the plus side, let's get positive for a second. Carrier-Gouli, what a freaking pairing. Are you kidding me? I love that pairing so much. I did not expect Carrier to come in and make this big of a difference, but they're the best pairing on the team right now, despite Hudson's brilliance.
I don't know, man. Like, Caden-Gouli is day and night since Alexandre Carrier got on the team. It is unfreaking real how much better Caden-Gouli is. Like, again, unsurprisingly, he's on his proper side, but like because it's actually happening now, we're seeing it these 20 games or, ish. Like, Caden-Gouli is now taking over moments in the penalty kill or taking over moments defensively because, I don't know, you're spending less energy. You are having to think a little bit less. We've talked about that extra half second, quarter second that he was losing. And now Matheson's losing it, but he is so much better. Just to close out the coming back down to earth, a couple of stats on it. Before this week, the previous 12 games, the Canadiens had a greater than 50% expected goal percentage, which in my opinion is the most telling stat at 5-on-5. It's the most telling stat of who was the better team. It's not definitive, but it's a pretty good indication. 8 of the last 12 games prior to this week. This week, they didn't have greater than 50 in any of them, 36, 32, and 44%. So you notice the drop in the quality, the goaltending saved them a bit. The other is, and like we're going to start to put some flags up on this, 25th in the NHL in the power play in January. And it's even worse when you take into account the fact that they've let in 3 shorties. So when you go to net power play percentage, or as we call it, adjusted power play, I think it's closer to 27th or 28th. That's just like, hey, look, goaltending's been saving them, but the power play's been struggling for quite a while now. They'll still score here and there, but they're still struggling. And 5-on-5, they started to wobble a bit this week. We just keep an eye on that. With that, Brian, I think we'll go into, so that was our Habsland headline. I'll go into my own headline. I know you have your own as well. And mine is knowing when the time is right. I've mentioned this in the past, how we've kind of reached the type of season I thought we were going to get. So this element of the season, I think, is fully expected. I see online lots of people clamoring for roster changes, for lineup changes. We've talked about it all season. And I will say, like, I should note, it often involves like giving the Montreal Canadiens drafted prospect bigger opportunities. So like the discussions this year have been like taking Mike Matheson off of power play 1 or getting Caden Primo out. Like, I think like, and then it's continued this year. Like it's continued into the past couple weeks now where noise is getting louder, right? Like people's gaze has shifted from, well, maybe Jakob Dobes should be started, the de facto starter, or take Mike Matheson off of the top pairing or replace Kirby Dach. you and I'll speak for both of us here, we tend to preach patience when we discuss the Montreal Canadiens for a variety of reasons. Look, like, I think you and I understand there's like a human element, there's a dressing room element where you can't just treat these guys like you're playing NHL, EA Sports, where you can just move guys in and out of the lineup. I think that's certainly a big part of how some people, armchair GM it and armchair coach it, where, oh yeah, just make this change. No. And like, you have to understand you're dealing with 20 players who are traveling together, who are playing together for 6-7 months consecutively. There's a lot more elements to it. So you and I are certainly cognizant of that. We still understand these are super low leverage games. This is a Saturday game in January against New Jersey. Like, the games overall will matter eventually, but with the level of parity and the loser point, leverages are super low right now. So it's okay to make a couple mistakes. Sometimes, Brian, we've been right. We preached patience on Uri Slafkovsky earlier in the year and said, like, I think we did a worry meter with him out. We've done it a couple times where we've just brought him up in like a worry meter, and every time I think our answer is 0 out of 10. And we're saying, pump the brakes. It's all right. He's going to be fine. Last year with Cole Caulfield, when he went real cold and was sitting on 19 goals for a while, both of us are saying, it's fine. Don't worry about it. We've done the math. It's 3 years to recover. Turns out it's closer to 1 with Cole Caulfield. Although, interesting tidbit, he is still not scoring at the rate that he scored at before his injury. It's very close. It's probably within the margin of error. He had 26 and 46 last time. He's currently at 25 and 49. So pretty close, but like, he is, he's at 95% of where he was. So we've been wrong in other times. You and I have preached patience on Caden Primo, and St. Louis patience ran out. You and I were both saying, hold out on trading Josh Anderson in 2023. This is probably our most egregious one. No, not saying don't trade him, just saying the price needs to be right and the value will be retained. And we were wrong on that one, so we'll admit that. I'm not saying you and I are right all the time or we're wrong, but this is just like, it's something I am constantly thinking about now. Like, there's the Dobesh stuff in terms of should he be getting more time. There's what the heck do you do with Mike Matheson? There's the Kirby Dach question that happens every other game. How do you know, Brian, when the time is right on all of these decisions?
That's a loaded question, and I'm probably the wrong guy to answer it. I don't think anybody other than Kent Hughes, Jeff Gorton, Martin St. Louis, the people who have been put in charge and have been making really, really good decisions. I think those are the only people that are capable of really answering that question. It also extends to the guys in Laval, right? There's guys that the fan base have been clamoring to see come up to replace some of the lesser players, especially when Heineman went out. Everybody was saying, give Roy a chance. Beck got a chance and wasn't up for that long. I think that one is fair enough, but everybody was saying, like, why Beck, why not Roy? Let's bring up Roy and just keep him all season. And Mailloux, similar thing. And the player needs to be ready. It's about it, and maybe that's the thing, is that it's about the team, but it's also about the player. You bring, I don't know, just as an example, Mailloux or Roy up now, and they don't compete as well as we would like them to, or they're disappointing, or whatever you want to call it. This is a hypothetical, right? I'm not saying they would be, but just in that hypothetical, what does that do to their confidence? What does it do to the players that they're playing with? What does it do to the Laval Rocket, where there are other players that you're developing? So it's not just about like bringing this player up or making this one change fixes this in the Montreal Canadiens lineup, and therefore they get 1 extra point against the Devils, for instance. It's not just about that. There's about 50 other points that you have to consider when all this is going on. And that might be the most compelling reason why patience is a virtue in this case. Because by not making a hasty decision, especially when the team's been playing very well, you're not risking anything worse happening. And I'll come back to that because, like I said, 10 of 15 wins, combine that with a couple of overtime or shootout losses, and the Montreal Canadiens got, 22 out of a possible 30 points? That's pretty darn good. And right after all of that happened, as soon as Heineman goes out and as soon as things are not going so well, people start panicking. Have you forgotten the past 15 games where they beat the Stars? I know the Rangers aren't great, but they're on a bit of a up and up. They beat the Avalanche in a shootout, the Canucks, the Golden Knights, Tampa, Florida. Like, are you forgetting all of these victories against great playoff contending teams? Like, just pump the brakes. We say that a lot. Pump the brakes. Like, there's time here. There's still a lot of time to not be reactionary, because that's the danger, is being reactionary and making a decision that's going to impact things negatively long term.
So I think if we're breaking it down even more, like, as we get into this conversation, it's at what point do you know a prospect is ready to take on more? And like, how do you scale them up to that next level? Because sometimes you and I will say, like, I think he's ready to take on more work. But I think people have different perceptions of that. Like you and I probably thought at the beginning, here's actually a good example for like St. Louis knowing it, is the Hudson part of it, where we thought Hudson would start second pairing, 16 to 18 minutes a game, second wave of the power play. We got the power play part, right? But very quickly, Hudson jumped up to 20, 22 minutes a game, right? So St. Louis immediately recognized, like, oh, I can give him more time now. There's stuff with Emil Heineman where like it was at 9 or 10 minutes early in the season. It's been slowly jumping up, but you have people clamoring like, no, put him on the second line when Alex Newhook wasn't performing or before when Laine was out recently when he was sick. Like, oh, put Heineman there, and you don't see St. Louis ready to like flip that switch and go fully on. And now we're seeing it with Dobesh. Dobesh is like the biggest example of it right now of like, okay, how much can you give this guy? And you can see some people being like, just give it to him. Like, go. Like, make him starter, give him 65, 70% of the games. But instead what you're seeing is Samuel Montembeault is still getting consecutive starts and Dobesh is getting 1 out of 3. And I can see like there's a frustration with some fans and in the fan base of like, why aren't they making the seemingly easy choice to like, we're looking at the numbers, we're looking at the performances. And in the last 3 weeks, there is no good argument to tell me that Jakub Dobesh should not be getting more games than Samuel Montembeault. That's what someone might say. And again, like, I can't argue against that too much. I've seen the Monty games. I've seen the Dobesh games. Dobesh has been a better goalie in the past 3-4 weeks. But you go back into Martin St. Louis' shoes and Ken Hughes, and like, first of all, they held on to keeping Dobesh and Laval as long as possible. And now he's made the switch to the Habs. And now it's like, okay, how quickly can you make that change? And I think some people just see the numbers and the performances. So that's an easy call. Just, hit the brick, Sam, and, enjoy the bench and give Jakub Dobesh the game. So
yeah, thanks for, Sam, see you later. Thanks for stealing tons of games for us and making the Canadiens a way better team than they would have been without you. Thanks for nothing.
Yeah.
How foolish. Like, it was a similar situation to Sam overtaking Jake Allen.
Yeah.
That took longer than we thought it would, you and I, Jordan, when Montembeault was playing much better games than Jake Allen was, and we were saying, well, Monty should be getting the line share of starts. He didn't. It takes a lot of time. It takes a lot of time for these things to progress. So I definitely patience on the Dobesh thing. Will it happen by end of season? If this trend continues and by the trade deadline or a little bit after that, Dobesh still looks like the better goaltender after he's played a good 15 games, I would say is a better sample size, maybe 12 games because he's getting less. Maybe at that point they do it. Fair enough. He's played 6 NHL games.
Yeah.
He just played 6, So patience all the way with this one. I don't know if there's any other examples that we have to get to in terms of specifics on the roster because Pezzetta's looked better. They changed up the bottom 6 a little bit, which that'll take some time to sink in. But I think I'm good with the way the roster is right now. Like, I don't want to make a panic move here.
Yeah, I think like the Pezzetta stuff to me is they just don't want to commit to one of the younger guys for too long. They just called up Raphael Harvey-Pinard. I think that's a nice stopgap while Heineman is went. The other part that we're not getting into, and we can move on to your headline, is the Matheson stuff of people clamoring all the time. It's the opposite, right? We're like, no, take it away from him. Like, and I think it's the same thing where some people see the last 2 to 4 weeks or the last month or so and look, Mike Matheson is an imperfect. I wouldn't even call him the number 1 defenseman on the team anymore, but ice time wise, it's he probably still gets more than Lane Hudson just because of the penalty kill. But as a top pairing defenseman, he is not ideal, and he's also not playing on his natural side anymore. But you can see some people saying, strip it from him, like get it away from him. If you touch Goulet Carrier, I will fight you in the streets.
Yeah, exactly.
And then what do you do with Lane Hudson then? Because Lane Hudson has earned 20 minutes at 5-on-5 plus his power play. So
yeah, no, there's no right answer here because you just change the pairings flat out, like time on ice wise, and suddenly Hudson's getting less than he should. And you break up Goulet Carrier, and I'll join you in that fight, buddy. I'll bring brass knuckles or something. Because that's just a bad decision.
Bring a trident. Let's move to your headline of the week, Brian.
Sounds good. So this one is not Habs related. It's NHL wide related. I'm sure you already know what it is. Rantanen to the Hurricanes. And I'll keep this one short because it's not Habs related. But I figured we should talk about the biggest trade this season for the past several seasons. I was trying to think, like, this is the biggest NHL trade since what? And two different trades flashed into my mind. The first one being the Matthew Tkachuk from the Flames to the Panthers, because that's a very kind of comparable power forward scorer, has been top like 3-5 in terms of scoring goals. A very sort of comparable thing. That was in the 2022 offseason. The other one's Jack Eichel from the Sabres to Vegas, another just incredibly high profile forward. In late 2021, that trade happened for Tuck and Krebs. So like, and even then, and I didn't want to like go through every trade there's ever been over the past 15 years and try and find a bigger one. Those were the two that flashed. And then I was like, I'm not going to look any further. But I still think this one's bigger. Like I think Rantanen to Carolina is a bigger trade than either of those two.
Yeah. Especially since it's mid-season. Like,
yeah,
a trade of, I mean, if you go even further back, the Subban and Weber, like, when it's this big, it's like the GMs need to not be distracted by anything else. It needs to be the offseason. They need to have their caps in order. And like Tkachuk, the Tkachuk one is the most comparable by far, but that was offseason. This is in the middle of the season, 2 weeks before the Four Nations face-off break. Whatever, a month or so before the trade deadline. And it involves one of the 10 best players in the NHL getting traded mid-season. Like, that's astonishing to me. That was the headliner of like, well, I mean, Mikko Rantanen getting traded, like you could see what was happening, but this would have been like much more digestible last summer than 45 games into the NHL season, which is just, that's what throws it off the charts for me, because you don't see something of this scale, of this magnitude during the season usually.
Yeah, the writing was definitely on the wall. You're right about that. Like Rantanen was not going to sign a contract for less than McKinnon, and they would get into cap trouble. Despite the fact that McKinnon and Rantanen are two unbelievable players they would have loved to keep, they're not going to spend over $26 million on two players, two forwards. So the details themselves, just for those of you who don't know, Carolina gets Mikko Rantanen from Colorado. They also get Taylor Hall from Chicago, who you were talking about like mid-season, like GMs don't want to be distracted by what's going on. Taylor Hall basically had to be told, hey, stop tying your skates. You're not playing tonight. Like, it wasn't that close, but it was a couple hours before game time, a few hours before he was supposed to go out. They also get Nils Jumtorp's rights, who's just a prospect. Colorado gets Martin Necas. I haven't mentioned yet, but that's the other reason this is a bigger trade, Jordan. Yes, it's in the middle of the season, but Necas is, I think, a far better player than Tuck, Krebs, Huberdeau, and Weegar. Like, Necas, he's at least on par with those guys and probably better. He's well over a point per game this season, similar to Nick Suzuki in terms of goals, but a few more assists. They also get Jack Drury, sort of, lower down in the lineup, undersized centerman, left-handed centerman. They get a 2025 second, a 2026 fourth, all from Carolina, and then Chicago gets a third from Carolina for giving up Taylor Halls and Nils Jumtorp. So there's no extension for Rantanen on the table just yet, but I'm sure the Canes will be looking to re-sign him. I don't think they make this move unless
you can't.
They have a good feeling that they'll be able to. Like, this isn't just a playoff run thing. This is, we want to keep him for the long haul and give him all the money. And then the other discussion I wanted to have with you, just quick here, Jordan, is because every time there's a big trade for a player that everybody loves, like Rantanen, all the Habs fans come out of the woodwork and be like, why didn't the Habs try for this? Okay, who exactly are the comparables for Martin Necas here? If Colorado needed a center entering their prime, it's Suzuki. Do you really want to give up Nick Suzuki? I don't. I personally don't. Even for Mikko Rantanen, like that probably would have been a non-starter. That's a really interesting discussion, which we can have if you want, but that'll probably be very time consuming. Doc is not anywhere near Necas. He's younger, much less developed. He hasn't shown it yet. If a near prime top six forward would have sufficed, it's Caulfield or Laine.
Yeah.
And Laine wouldn't have done it. Caulfield probably wouldn't have done it. And we wouldn't want to part with Caulfield anyway. And then if the Avs wanted to roll the dice on possibly future Rantanen, it's Slavkovsky. And I think that's a non-starter. So like, what are we getting upset about here? Pretty calm down. We weren't getting Rantanen. Carolina got him. Like, can you think of another avenue that the Canadiens could have used to maybe land him?
No, of course not. Like,
yeah,
they're not. First of all, like, this is actually right on the heels of us doing our trade value list. And you just basically named all the NHL caliber guys in tiers 1 and 2, right? You named Suzuki, Caulfield, Slavkovsky, Laine in terms of forwards. Lane Hutson's the only other NHL guy, and he's a defenseman, obviously. Like, that's the quality that the Habs would have had to part with. Someone in the top 10 of the Habs trade value. You said, obviously, first of all, like, that's a bit of a damning statement on your Kirby Doc defense last week if you kind of threw Doc out right away. But every other forward in that group, you're like, they're pretty good. If I remember, you wanted Kirby Doc in tier 2, but you just said he'd.
I did. Yeah.
You said Slav.
That's
Caulfield,
a very fair
Line
point,
A.
Jordan.
Anyways, point is.
Yep.
No,
very fair point.
There was no. They wanted a very much in their prime top 6. I'll say forward. It's Caulfield and it's Suzuki. Those would have been the 2 guys. That's it. They're not taking Patrick Laine for this trade. I don't think that fits for them.
No.
Even though, like, contractually it lines up with how Natchez is. Similar amount of dollar numbers. 1 extra year on that deal as well. But there's a lot of uncertainty with Patrick Laine compared to Martin Natchez. Okay. So forget that part. One thing quickly, Chicago. What the actual hell was going on with Chicago? Like, I think they basically gave up $5 million in cap space for a 3rd round pick. Is that how I understood it? Like, they're retaining salary is it on Taylor Hall? Anyways, like, just, I don't know what the hell. Like, I don't know why Chicago is involved in this trade. I mean, I know, like, there needed to be cap. Someone needed to retain salary, but to only get a 3rd for that leverage, when you would think there would be a bit more. Anyways, that stupidities. The big thing here, of course, is Rantanen. The Carolina, like, Mikko Rantanen had tons of leverage in Colorado. He has more leverage now in Carolina.
Because they just moved a ton to get him.
The rumor of him wanting 7 or 8, actually be 8 years by $14 million, like, that's going to stay his number. That's the number that he has been asking for. And I think Colorado was very hesitant to go over that McKinnon 12.5, I think. That's what they're going to be playing with. It's going to be, 8 years, 12.5, 8 years, 14, 7 years, 13, something like that. Would you do it, Brian? Let's say you get the phone call, your Ken Hughes on July 1st. Let's say they haven't figured it out yet. And Rantanen's agent says, look, they've offered him 8 years, 12 million. It's a good deal. They can offer that extra year. If you give us 7 years at 14 million, we're walking through that door. Would you do it?
Oh, man. I don't know. My answer is I don't know. I would love to. Like, my heart tells me yes, because Rantanen's a hell of a player. And that contract is going to be fair for the first few seasons. And the cap goes up when it's less fair. So
it's a tough one.
My heart tells me yes. Do you want that much cap space tied up in one guy long term like that? Man, I think I still say yes. I think I do it. Like, that's your best forward for the next 5 years.
Yeah. It's also helpful because he can play his off wing, so you'd have really good balance.
Yes.
Up to Meadoff, Slav on one side, Rantanen, Caulfield. I mean, look, we know this is like silly discussion. Please forgive us for it. But it'd be Caulfield and Rantanen on the other side. You still need to figure out your 2C, but like, it's a crap load of money. I think what I really feel, the only thing that even stops me from being like, obviously, is the Bergevin contracts. Put Price aside, but Gallagher and Anderson is 12 million. That's the cap space.
Yep.
Now you could argue like, okay, for the first 2 years, Hudson is still rookie for one of them. Demidov will be rookie for 2 of them, for both of them, right? And then you wipe the 12 million off, and then you can, there might still be a bit of a crunch in 1 year there, but assuming Hudson's an $8 or $9 million guy right off the bat. But I'm pretty sure I would do it. I'm pretty sure. Now, it'll be interesting to see Rantanen by himself, not by himself, but like away from Nathan McKinnon.
Yep.
And see what he is like. And also with Natchez, to the inverse with Natchez. But like, to see what Mikko Rantanen can do on his own and how, what was the McKinnon factor and how that might actually affect his value. Because I wonder if those are the internal conversations in Colorado of like, we think he's awesome. We know he's not better than Nate, but that's free agency. So it'll be interesting to see what happens with Mikko Rantanen.
For sure. And I have an answer for you on why did Chicago do this. The Sharks have lost 6 straight and have just overtaken them for the best lottery odds. So Chicago had to get rid of one of their 4 serviceable forwards.
I mean, I guess. I don't. This is like, we've looked at this draft class a bit. I think we're looking at a little bit less now that the Habs have picked it up a bit. But like so Schaefer's the only top tier defenseman in there. I don't think Chicago needs another defenseman, which means they'd have to go for one of the forwards. No one's really jumping out the gym.
They would want a killer centerman, but no, that's right. No one's it's yeah. Oh. It's a weak year.
Yeah, okay. Jump into part 2. Let's do some fill in the blanks. It's just one fill in the blank this week, but we have to give multiple answers to it. So, the fill in the blank is the Habs will make the playoffs if blank. Now, for the listener, I've challenged Brian on this. We're going to give 2 answers. One must be quantitative or like numbers based, data based, whatever. And one must be qualitative, based, vibes based, just eye test maybe, just to balance it out a bit. We don't want it to be all numbers. We don't need to be like Jakob Dobish is in a 925 save percentage and the Habs power plays at 22%, which is probably the answer. But like, let's strip it away from that. So One is with data and one is with eye test. We both are going to each have an answer. So we're going to have 4 total. And I think, Brian, what we're going to learn is if the Canadiens do all 4 of these things, they should definitely be making the playoffs. We're not going to bother giving the standings update because you blink and then another team gets 2 points and then you go from the first wild card spot to 11th in the East. It's a very big jumble right now. I think there's really only 2 or 3 teams that I could confidently say are out of it. And who knows, the Islanders can always just go on a bit of a run and they'll be back in it. But for all intents and purposes, both wild card spots are available and potentially that third Atlantic. So it's in play. So Brian, let's I'll shift it over to you. Fill in your first fill in the blank. The Habs will make the playoffs if...
I'm going to start with my quantitative. The Habs will make the playoffs if they average less than 3 minor penalties per game for the rest of the season. I chose to look at the biggest glaring issue that this team has across the entire NHL. They are the worst at this. Currently, the Canadiens have the worst minor penalty per game ratio at 3.8, almost 4 minor penalties per game. So if you look at just penalty minutes, I think like Boston and some other teams that fight a lot are above the Canadiens because 5-minute majors. So I'm just looking at minors where you're giving up a power play, basically. So 3.8, that's a ton. And we obviously have the most penalty kills. Thank goodness our PK is good. If it was bad, we wouldn't be having the conversation about how the Habs will make the playoffs if that would sound very silly. So this isn't just about avoiding giving up power play goals to the opponents, right? Because like I said before, the Habs are very good on the penalty kill. So they're not burned as much as some other teams might be with all of these penalties taken. It's more of a momentum and an opportunity thing, really. The Habs have negated their own power plays very, very often. They've taken penalties late in games when they needed to score goals to complete a comeback. They've taken really dumb ones early in periods when they had the momentum and therefore lost it. So it's more of game management than avoiding power play goals against. Several losses this season were decided by the Canadiens' inability to stay out of the box. So if that continues, several more losses are going to pile up in the exact same way and then kiss the playoffs goodbye because it's not happening. So I'm saying they're at 3.8 right now, roughly. They need to average less than 3, which would not even put them in the top half of the league, Jordan. Like the top half of the league is closer to like 2.5. This would just put them in that mediocre like 20s range.
Yeah, no, that's a really good one. And that's something we've identified throughout the year of the Habs discipline is certainly an issue. Look, penalty kill, like you've said, I think it's 9th or 10th in the NHL right now. Like it's pretty strong. But like, I mean, one way of looking at it, or maybe just like a good example of what you're trying to hit home with is routinely the first player over the boards when it's 5-on-5 and the guy who was in the box runs to the bench is Cole Caulfield because you have spent the previous 2+ minutes without your best goal scorer. And that's why usually you see Nick at the end. If it happens, there's like 20 seconds left in the penalty kill, like they'll put Nick on the ice so that immediately you can have Suzuki and Caulfield together again. That's, I think, part of the it's if you're taking too many penalties, you are taking your Slavkovsky off the ice, you're taking Patrick Laine off the ice, you're taking Cole Caulfield off the ice. And that's not how you win. This team, while the bottom 6, now without Heineman, the bottom 6 has started to become a bit shaky, but the bottom 6 is fairly strong and disciplined. The second line's been a bit of a mess this year. It's just inconsistent. It is what it is. That first line has been dynamite the whole year. Caulfield and Slav are not on the penalty kill. When you kill penalties, those guys don't play on the ice. So yes, take less penalties. Like if the penalty kill was bad, it would be like even worse. But
yeah, of course,
you can't keep taking away your own opportunities, and that's what they're doing with all these penalties. So I really like that statement.
What's your first one, Jordan?
The Habs will make the playoffs if Nick Suzuki gets the 90 points. And this is touching on what I actually just said of the bottom six is solid. Let's get Emil Heineman back. The second line is just going to be this like nefarious, we don't know what we're going to get game to game. Like there are shifts where Kirby Dach is being that guy again. There are shifts where, I mean, at 5-on-5, Patrick Laine, if we're being honest, has not been overly impressive for what we expect on the power play. He's been at a completely different level, but at 5-on-5, it's been all right. And that's just the line in of itself. It's just weird. I don't know if it just doesn't work, but those are the guys. The first line has been incredible. Look at them on Saturday against New Jersey. I mean, was it both the first two goals were Suzuki, Caulfield, Slav all getting points? And I mean, you can even see it in I believe it was the first goal where Slavkovsky wins a board battle, then gets it to Caulfield. Caulfield finds Suzuki to score. The second one is the Hudson play initially to make the very long 2-line pass. But then eventually Suzuki finds Caulfield. Caulfield dances around the defenseman and then shoots it over Kovacevic's stick and beats Jake Allen, which is funny enough. Also, Caulfield really does like going cross body when he does that. That he'll be on right side shot, but he's moving right to left. He will still shoot right side, and I find that he gets that on the goalie more often than not. So yeah, those guys are going to have to be in a position where they just have to take over games, and that's Nick Suzuki. He's now he's a +9 right now. He is having from a points production standpoint, it's not too different than it was last year, but I think unequivocally it's his best season. He did disappoint us by taking his third penalty of the season this week, which again,
what are you doing, Nick?
He's playing
49 games, already 3 penalties. Come on, buddy.
Yeah, he might get the 5 this year. He has been so good and so consistent, and I do think it's a coin flip this team making the playoffs. I looked at Money Puck, and I know you and I have talked about Money Puck versus Hockey Reference, what the Habs percentage is of making the playoffs. Money Puck's right now at 25%. So it's probably a little higher. Money Puck tends to beat the Habs down a bit. Maybe it's 1 in 3, 40% chance, something like that. Suzuki has to go up a level, I think, because there's other things, right? There's the goaltending, there's the penalties like you've talked about. But if Suzuki just finds another gear, and they find it here in moments, but if he finds another gear and gets them to contribute offensively, especially at 5-on-5, then a 90-point Suzuki season is in play. And it's one of those seasons where it could legitimately be and please don't laugh, there could be Hart candidate votes for a season like this, where if he goes on a tear now, he's at 50 points in 49 games. If he could get to 90, then you can make the clear connection of, it's because that first line is dragging the team at 5-on-5 up to above average quality. It's going to be led by Nick Suzuki. He's going to find Cole Caulfield. He deserves the praise too, but it starts with Nick. So if Nick gets to 90, it means that the first line has jumped a level or even 2. And at that point, it's really carrying the team offensively. And he's going to be fine defensively. So that's my statement. The Habs will make the playoffs if Suzuki gets to 90.
Wow. Well, that would certainly be that line dragging the team into the playoffs if that were to be the single factor that does it, in combination with the other 3 that we mentioned. We talked about the discipline already, and then the other 2 that we're going to mention. In combination with that would certainly help. That would go a long way, because a lot of those would be on the power play, which would resolve that issue that we've been seeing in January. And then that, he plays penalty kill as well, maybe a shorty or 2. Those are always fun. And then at 5-on-5, that's the most important thing, like you said. Very cool, Jordan. I like that one. My next one is pretty global. It's that the Canadiens will make the playoffs if the identity that they've played with against the best teams in this death stretch is the identity they play with for the rest of the year. And now that's a mouthful, and it also encapsulates a bunch of things. So forgive me, Jordan, but I might be doing another cop out, but I couldn't think of a better way to describe it than that, because when the Canadiens focus through the full 60 minutes of a hockey game, when they play with mistake aversion, so they're not just coughing up the puck in the defensive zone because they're trying to do too much. They're really avoiding mistakes, and they have defensive responsibility, and the defensive system, the hybrid system, is working. And when they're forechecking really strongly throughout an entire game, and especially at the beginning of games and periods, their physical play is there, they're hitting hard. when they can roll 4 lines. Like I know you said that the bottom 6 has been shaky since Heineman's been out. That's absolutely true, but they'll figure it out. Like it's a lot of veteran guys. They will figure it out. The second line, I liked what I saw at times against New Jersey, but you're right about its inconsistency. So, and then we talked about the discipline already. That goes into identity. So yes, it's all of these things together, but it's really the mindset that allows for all of these things. It's the focus that allows for all these things. So I'm not saying like you can't make any mistakes. I talked about mistake aversion. It's not that you can't make any mistakes. It's that you have to be in that focused mindset for the entire 60 minutes of every single hockey game for the rest of the year in order to win enough games to make it. And that's no small thing. Right. Like I'm not asking for them to just improve a little. Like that's the degree of focus that this would require would be substantial, but it's also the degree of focus that would be required for them to make any type of meaningful push in the playoffs. So if they were to make the playoffs, you would want them to do it in such a way where they could actually do damage in the playoffs after making it.
So to that point, according to Tankathon, the Canadiens have the 5th easiest schedule remaining. Second in the East, only Toronto has an easier schedule. So the identity part, I think, will be oddly enough tested against teams we've talked about. How like when they see like, oh crap, it's Vegas tonight, let's bring it. But they're not necessarily bringing the same energy maybe against Detroit, like we saw on Thursday night. The schedule for the next 33 games, it's much easier, clearly, than it has been so far this season. The identity will be tested there, right? Like, a lot of people tend to do their best work when they have a deadline approaching, when they have to deliver. People tend to be less productive, less efficient when they have a lot of time and they can just, waste away a bit. That's human nature, right? But if you have that as a hockey club, if you have an identity, if you know every night, Brendan Gallagher's there, he's saying, guys, we got to play this way. Nick Suzuki's there saying, hey, we're playing X, Y, and Z way. We're going to bring the physicality. We're going to be fast. We're going to be really quick in transition, which they've, like, for all intents and purposes, a game here or there, they'll stumble, but like they have figured out how to get the puck out of the zone so cleanly now compared to where they were in October and November. They need to find that level of consistency on a Sunday afternoon game against Anaheim.
Yeah.
That's what the next step is.
That's really well said, because you're right. It is sort of easy to play your game when you're playing against an amazing team and you don't want to be embarrassed, but it's just as embarrassing to not play your game and lose to Nashville or Anaheim, like you said. Like, it's really against the weak teams. They're going to have to figure it out. I do wonder if the fact that they're ending the season against a bunch of weak teams is actually a really bad thing. I'm fearful of that. It's an anxiety that I have, because I mean, look, the proof's in the pudding. The way that this team plays against lesser opponents is not the way that they play against better opponents. And I wish it were, because then they'd win a lot more games against the middling and bad teams.
The last part on this, last 5 games of the season, to your point. So 6, actually. We can go at Nashville is the 6th last game of the season. Then home to Detroit, assuming that's going to be playoff energy vibes. At Ottawa, as long as
same thing.
Traffic on the 417 is not too bad, I will be there. At Toronto, that's the hook in there. Toronto might be done, they might not be. And then super weird, home to Chicago, home to Carolina to end. Like, why are we playing in the other conference with 2? It's so stupid. Like, that should be home to Boston, home to the Rangers or something. I don't know why we're finishing with 2 random teams. But yes, to your point, like, in terms of quality of competition in the last 6 games, I mean, you can add Phillies right before that too. So the last 7 games, it's really what Toronto and Carolina are going to be the 2 definite playoff teams that Habs will go up against. The other 5 are either going to be fighting for a playoff spot, which could make it a tougher game, or be completely out of it, like Nashville and Chicago, obviously. So we'll see. Last one for me. The Habs will make the playoffs if they keep the rocking of the boat to a minimum. So this is in reference to the trade deadline. We're going to talk about the trade deadline in much more detail in a couple weeks. We're just going to let things settle a bit, see if any moves happen. But before we get to the Four Nations face-off, Brian and I are going to spend some time on what the Canadiens should do at the trade deadline. What I'll say for now is, I'm not saying don't make a trade, but make sure you are keeping your gaze on 2026 and beyond. Because, again, the interesting position the Habs are in is the bottom 6, I'm pretty confident in. Bring Emil Heineman back. I really enjoy the bottom six the way they are constructed right now. The top six, you have a couple permanent positions, right? Like tenured staff, Nick Suzuki, Cole Caulfield, Uri Slafkovsky, they're not going anywhere. Patrick Laine is not going anywhere this season for sure. So theoretically, there's some spots in the top six available, but I'm not sure a trade deadline type trade, which is almost always short term, like rentals, UFAs, is the right move. So I don't know if like jumping that high even makes remote sense. And I also want to say, like, whether it's Armia or Evans or Savard, like, just be careful. Like, don't upset the apple cart a little. I'm switching my metaphors, but like, don't do too much, because I think the balance that they've struck in these last 20, 30 games has been fantastic. And it doesn't mean don't try to get better, but just be a little bit careful about everyone has found their role. Everyone is in the right spot in the pecking order. Yes, I know Mike Matheson is a little bit out of sorts, but I don't know if you're going to solve that issue. Like the issues that they have, I don't know if you can solve them or should solve them with a trade deadline type acquisition.
Right.
That's kind of where I'm standing. And the guys that you could move, the expirings, it might not totally be worth it to make those moves, because I don't know if like what you're getting in return makes sense at this point. Are you tracking that?
Yeah, I think you're dead on. I think the only means of really improving that I see, at the risk of slighting the guy I always slight, is a two-pronged attack where one move gets rid of Christian Dvorak. Maybe you have to package assets with him. And then another move, you give up prospects to get a real third line center. And then we're talking. And then this team maybe has legs. But finding that third line center, finding a buyer for Dvorak, finding a team that wants the prospects you're willing to give up, there's a lot of sort of moving parts. So, yeah. Whether that's feasible or not, I completely agree with you, by the way, about Evans, Armia. Those are not the guys that you move if you're looking to make a push. They are so integral to the defense of this team and the penalty kill, and just being able to roll four lines like that. That's really a blessing that we shouldn't take for granted.
Yeah. Like Armia, for me, like his value is probably like a second and a fourth. Like, do you do that? Like, does it matter to do that? Like a 2026 second and a 2027 fourth. Like that's probably fair value for him.
Yeah, you're probably right. If you're looking to win, you don't do it. He has way more value to you as a player than he would in a trade.
Yeah, and I think you're just disrupting too much at that point.
Yeah.
Like to your point earlier about Laval and who is ready to like jump up a level, I'm not sure if you have an Armia replacement ready. I think theoretically it's Oliver Kapanen in the organization. It's him, but he is also in Europe right now, so he is not an option.
Yeah. And part of what makes Armia great, maybe the thing that makes him great, is his veteran status. The fact that he's played hundreds of games makes him just so much smarter than a lot of the guys that he goes up against. So even if he doesn't have all of the skill in the world, his brain still works at a level where like he has so much experience that he knows what to do in most situations. So and there's just so much value there to the Canadiens if they're going on a run. If they lose, like if they play another 2 weeks worth of bad games and lose 6 of 7 or something like that, and we're no longer talking playoffs because all the other teams won, hey, maybe you look at that stuff. But I certainly don't want to look at that side of things. I want to look at if the Canadiens win 6 of 7 and are in an Atlantic or a wild card spot, like how can we improve? That's way more interesting to me. So I'm excited about that. I think that next week, though, we're going to be doing our Four Nations preview, which is going to be a lot of fun. So we're going to be previewing the 4 teams that are going to the Four Nations: Sweden, Finland, the US, and Canada. We've talked about it a little bit, but this time we're really going to dive deep. And then the week after, we'll actually talk really deeply about the trade deadline.
Yeah. Yeah, that's kind of the outlook for the next couple weeks, I think. So to summarize our fill in the blank, essentially the Canadiens need to play with an identity, which includes being more disciplined. The first line needs to jump up at least one more level, and I'm looking specifically at Captain Nick. And the front office needs to kind of properly gauge where this team is at in its trajectory and its rebuild, and understand like they can make moves, but to be very cautious with it. So, because I really, again, like this might be a thing where some people might say like, why are you overthinking the deadline? Just make the team better, or just, trade them for draft picks. But like there's a dressing room element to this. Of if you walk in one day and said, yeah, we have to trade Jake. Don't worry, we got a first round pick in 2026. Like, there is a intangible component to make. There's the tangible part of you lose your third line center. There's an intangible part of what you just told everyone in that room. Same goes for Yoel Armia. It's not to the same extent, but he's been awesome this year for what he's been asked to do. You can't just walk into the room one day and say, yeah, we've traded, Yoel Armia for a second and a fourth. And this like Swedish prospect who's 18 years old. There's that balance, right? Like, that's the part that some people will either refuse to hear or just not comprehend. But like, that's certainly an aspect to it. So like, there's a good vibe in the room right now. Don't mess it up. Take less penalties. Jump up a level, line one. Play with your identity consistently. And then you make the playoffs. Sounds pretty easy.
That's it. Hey, I think we just surmised it.
Yeah. All right. Well, I think we'll wrap the episode at that. This has been yet another groundbreaking episode of This Week in Habs Land. We'll be back next week to discuss more Habs, like Brian said. We'll also talk a lot of Four Nations next week, so get ready for that. You can follow us on social media at Habsland Pod on Blue Sky and TikTok. If you like what you heard, feel free to leave a 5-star rating on Spotify and Apple Podcast. Until next Monday, go Habs.